I used to think love was supposed to be easy. Like you meet someone, and everything just falls into place. That's how it's supposed to happen, right? You find the one, and all of a sudden, life makes sense. That's what I always believed. But the truth? The truth was that love didn't just happen for me. I wasn't good enough for it. Not in the ways that mattered anyway. I didn't have the money, the job, the confidence. Hell, I didn't even have the kind of life that people talk about when they're in their 30s and they're supposed to have it all together. I felt like I was stuck on the sidelines, watching everyone else pass me by. I tried to make something of myself, but it felt like nothing ever stuck. I'd get close, but it always felt like I was on the verge of failing. I thought I'd eventually get there, but every time I did, I found myself back at square one. And when it came to relationships, well, that was a whole other mess. Emily was everything I never thought I deserved. From the moment we started talking, there was this connection, this spark. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. She saw me. She heard me. She actually listened to what I had to say. No one ever did that before. It felt like she cared, and I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know what to do with that kind of attention. It was overwhelming in a way, because I didn't know if I could keep up with her. Emily was everything I never thought I deserved. From the moment we started talking, there was this connection, this spark. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. She saw me. She heard me. She actually listened to what I had to say. No one ever did that before. It felt like she cared, and I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know what to do with that kind of attention. It was overwhelming in a way, because I didn't know if I could keep up with her. She'd make these little comments that made me feel like I was special to her. And it was flattering. It felt good. But it also made me feel like a fraud. Like at any moment, she'd figure out that I wasn't this confident, successful guy she thought I was. I'd see her with other people, hear about the things she was doing, and I'd just feel small. I wasn't on her level, and I wasn't sure I could ever get there. So, I started pulling away. I thought if I could just keep some distance, if I could act aloof, maybe she wouldn't notice how insecure I was. Every time she'd talk about her career or her accomplishments, I felt like I was drowning. I wanted to be proud of her, but I also felt this ache in my chest. She was everything I wanted to be, and I wasn't there yet. I started questioning if she could really love someone like me. I'd make excuses not to see her, not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid of her seeing how broken I felt inside. Looking back, I realized now that I wasn't giving her a chance. I wasn't letting her love me. I was pushing her away without even realizing it. I was so scared of being exposed, so afraid that she'd realize I was just a guy who was pretending to have his life together, that I couldn't let myself be vulnerable. I couldn't trust that she loved me. I couldn't trust myself. Things started to change, and I didn't even know how or why. At first, it was small stuff. I'd see a text from a guy, or she'd be out with her friends, and I'd feel this knot in my stomach. It wasn't about her. Well, not entirely. It was about me. I'd convince myself that she didn't need me. I'd see her enjoying herself without me, and I'd think, what if she's better off without me? I couldn't stop myself from checking her phone. I hated myself for it, but I did it anyway. I'd ask her where she was, who she was with, just to reassure myself that everything was okay. And every time she'd tell me it was nothing, I'd doubt her. I'd read too much into little things. If she mentioned a guy at work, I'd get jealous, even though I had no reason to be. But I couldn't help it. I was terrified that I wasn't enough for her. And the worst part was that I didn't even tell her how I was feeling. I didn't let her in. Instead, I let my insecurities control everything. I'd get upset for no reason, pull away, act distant. I convinced myself it was because I cared, because I was worried about losing her. But in reality, it was because I was too afraid of facing the truth. I didn't believe she loved me the way I needed to be loved. I tried to hide it, but she could feel it. I could see it in her eyes. She'd ask me if something was wrong, and I'd say no, but we both knew that wasn't true. I wasn't okay. I wasn't okay with myself. And I wasn't okay with us. There was this one night, probably the worst night of my life, that I'll never forget. It wasn't anything special. No major fight or crazy misunderstanding. It just happened. We were sitting in the living room, like we did most evenings, when I felt this familiar ache in my chest. I couldn't shake it, this creeping sense of doubt that had been building for weeks. Everything was fine, or at least it looked fine on the surface. She was sitting there on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her eyes soft, her smile warm. But inside I was burning up. It wasn't even about anything she'd done. It was about me. About how I couldn't stop thinking that she was too good for me. That maybe she was realizing it. 2. That maybe she was starting to see what I already knew. I wasn't enough for her. She could tell something was off, like she always did. She was good at reading me, maybe better than I was at reading myself. She put her phone down and looked at me, her face soft, concerned. "Jake, what's going on? You've been quiet all evening," she said. Her voice was gentle, but there was this hint of worry that made my stomach tighten. I should have been honest. I should have told her how I was feeling, told her about the thoughts I was having, the fear that had been gnawing at me. But I didn't. Instead, I just shrugged it off. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Just tired." But she wasn't buying it. She never did. She knew me too well. She leaned forward, her brows furrowing slightly. "Jake, don't do that. Don't shut me out," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I don't like it when you do that. If something's bothering you, I want to know," and that's when it happened. That moment when I felt like I was drowning in my own fear and frustration. I didn't know how to talk about what I was feeling. I didn't know how to admit that I was scared. So instead I lashed out. I didn't mean to, but it just came out. It felt like a reflex, a way to defend myself when I was feeling vulnerable. "You wouldn't understand," I snapped, my voice sharp. The words were out before I could stop them. "You're perfect. You've got everything together. You don't get it, Emily. I'm not good enough for you." Her expression faltered for a second, and I could see the confusion in her eyes. But I wasn't done. I couldn't stop. The words came faster now, each one laced with more anger. More pain than I knew how to deal with. "You have this perfect life, this perfect job, this perfect everything," I continued, my voice rising. "And here I am, just some guy who can't even get his own life together. I don't even know why you're still with me." I could see the hurt flash across her face, and for a second I hated myself. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I was spiraling, and I was too deep in it to pull myself out. I was drowning in my own fears of inadequacy, and I didn't know how to communicate any of it. Instead, I just kept pushing her away. "Stop, Jake," she said quietly, her voice breaking, but she didn't shout. She wasn't angry, but I could see the pain in her eyes. "I never said you weren't good enough. I never thought that. I just want to be with you. Why can't you see that? Because I'm not enough," I shouted, my hands balled into fists. "I'll never be enough. And I'm not asking you to settle for me. I'm just trying to figure out how to be someone you can be proud of, but I can't even do that." And there it was. My biggest fear, out in the open. I was terrified that she would leave. Terrified that the woman I loved would realize that I was never going to be the man she needed me to be. I couldn't control it anymore. The doubt, the insecurity, all the things I hadn't dealt with, they came rushing to the surface. And I didn't know how to stop. Emily was quiet for a moment. She didn't move. She just sat there, looking at me, her expression unreadable. I couldn't tell what she was thinking, but I knew it wasn't good. I knew she was probably thinking that she didn't deserve this, that maybe she couldn't keep dealing with my self-doubt, my insecurity. Finally, she spoke, her voice small but steady. "Jake, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be in a relationship where I'm constantly made to feel like I have to prove myself to you. I love you, but I can't keep fighting this fight on my own. And that hit me like a freight train. It wasn't anger in her voice. It wasn't resentment. It was the kind of quiet sadness that I knew meant she was done. Done with the constant battles in her own heart, done with feeling like she wasn't enough for me, even though she was giving me everything she had. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling now. But I can't keep doing this. I don't even remember what happened after that. My mind was spinning, and everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. I wanted to reach out to her, to apologize, to beg her to stay, but the words got stuck in my throat. I couldn't even look at her. I couldn't look at myself. I heard the door close softly behind her as she walked out of the apartment, and in that moment, I felt like my whole world had come crashing down. It was too late. I had pushed her away. I had let my fears control me, and now I was sitting there, in the dark, alone. But even then, deep down, I knew this was my fault. I knew I had caused this. She didn't leave because she didn't love me. She left because I couldn't love myself. I couldn't trust her, couldn't trust us. And in the end, that was the one thing that broke everything between us. I remember sitting there for hours, not knowing what to do next. I thought about calling her, texting her, but I didn't know what I could say. What could I say? I had said everything I needed to say in that argument, and none of it was right. The words I had screamed in anger, the doubts I had voiced, they were all just the product of my own insecurities. I had ruined it, and I knew it. But knowing it didn't make the pain go away. It only made it worse. After Emily left, I was lost. I thought I could just keep moving, like it was any other setback. But it wasn't. It felt like my entire world had shattered. There was this heavy silence in my apartment, and no matter how many times I turned on the TV or tried to distract myself with work, it just wouldn't go away. Every corner of that place reminded me of her. The little things. The way her keys used to sit on the kitchen counter. The picture of us from that trip to the beach, where we were both laughing like we had all the time in the world. I'd walk around aimlessly, my mind racing. I kept hearing her voice in my head. Jake, you have to stop doing this. Over and over. I couldn't shake it. I had pushed her away. I'd been so wrapped up in my own insecurities, so desperate to prove that I was enough, that I had ignored her. I hadn't listened to her when she tried to tell me what I was doing. When she needed me to just show up, I was too busy trying to control everything around me. I tried to fill the silence, but it never worked. I'd go out with friends, try to keep busy, but it was all just noise. The loneliness was unbearable. I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts because every time I was, it felt like I was drowning in them. I would replay every argument we had, every moment I could have done differently, but what was the point? The damage was done. For the first time in a long time, I felt utterly alone. Not just in the sense of being by myself, but alone with myself. All the things I had avoided about me, the fears, the insecurities, the parts of me I hadn't dealt with, came rushing to the surface. I couldn't hide from them anymore. I couldn't avoid the truth. The truth was, I had never learned to love myself. And that's what had led to all of this. I spent hours looking back at messages from Emily, at the notes we had exchanged, the plans we had made for the future. I realized, slowly and painfully, that the real issue wasn't about her leaving. It was about me not being able to accept love in the first place. I had spent so much of my life telling myself that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't worthy of being loved, that I had sabotaged the one real chance I had at happiness. I thought if I could just be more successful, more confident, more something, then maybe I'd be worthy. But that's not how it works. Love isn't about being perfect. It's not about checking off boxes or fitting some ideal that you think someone else wants. I thought it was, but Emily, she showed me what love really was. It wasn't about me being perfect, it was about accepting each other, flaws and all. It was about trust, and it was about letting go of the fear of being vulnerable. I also realized something even more painful. My fear, the jealousy, the need to control, it wasn't about Emily at all. It was about me being terrified of being abandoned. I thought if I just held on tighter, kept a tighter grip on everything, that I could stop losing people. But all I did was push them away faster. And I knew it. I knew it, even as I kept doing it. It was like some reflex. Every time I felt threatened, I would retreat into this shell, and I'd shut people out before they could hurt me. But in doing that, I was the one who hurt the most. Emily had never given me a reason to doubt her. She was there for me in ways I couldn't even appreciate at the time. But I let my fear of not being enough take over. And I couldn't see it. And because of that, I lost her. At night, I would lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, haunted by thoughts of how I'd let this happen. I kept thinking about what I should have said or what I should have done. I wanted to go back in time, to tell her how much she meant to me, to show her how much I had to offer. But I couldn't. I couldn't fix the past. I couldn't undo the damage I'd done. The worst part? I didn't even know how to begin to fix myself. It felt like everything I had built up about who I was, this guy who had to have it all together, who had to be in control, was just a lie. I didn't have it together. I didn't have any of the answers. And it terrified me. I had spent so much of my life trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to fill a role that I thought I was supposed to fit into. But none of that was me. It was all a mask. I had no idea who I was without the persona I had built. And that's the moment I realized I needed to change. I couldn't keep hiding behind this facade. I had to stop pretending that everything was fine. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. I had to face the parts of myself that I'd been running from for so long. It wasn't just about winning Emily back, it was about winning myself back. If I didn't learn to love myself, to accept myself, I was never going to be able to truly love someone else. I knew I had a long road ahead of me, but at least for the first time, I was ready to walk it. I was ready to face the things I had been avoiding. I started working on myself in ways I never had before. I stopped focusing on success as a way to prove my worth. I started seeing a therapist to work through my insecurities, my fears of abandonment, my need for control. I started doing the hard work of figuring out who I really was, and learning to accept that person, flaws and all. It wasn't easy. Some days I'd slip back into old habits. I'd still get caught up in my fears. But little by little, I was learning. I was learning to be okay with not having it all together. I was learning to trust, not just other people, but myself. And for the first time in a long time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was worthy of love. Not because of what I had, or what I could give, but because I was enough as I was. I had to learn that the hard way. But I was finally starting to see it. After she left, I tried to stay busy. I told myself that I'd just focus on work, focus on fixing my life. But the truth was, everything felt hollow. Every little thing I did just felt like I was going through the motions. I kept thinking about her, about the way she laughed, the way she cared. The way I pushed her away when all she wanted to do was be there for me. I started thinking about how I'd acted. How I'd never really let her in. She'd tell me she loved me, but I was too busy second-guessing her, second-guessing myself. I thought I had to be perfect for her, that I had to have everything figured out. But perfection? Perfection isn't real. No one has it all together, no matter how much they pretend they do. And yet there I was, trying to live up to this ideal that didn't exist. Trying to prove to her, to myself, that I was enough. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't enough. Not because of her, but because I didn't believe I was worthy of love. I thought that if I just had more money, more success, more confidence, then I'd finally be good enough. But I was wrong. I was enough. Right where I was. But I didn't see it. I couldn't see it until it was too late. I started realizing that the thing I had been so afraid of, the thing I was pushing away, was the very thing I needed. I needed to learn to trust. To trust her. To trust myself. But I was too blinded by my own insecurities to see that. And that's why I lost her. It's funny. When you lose someone, you think it's about them. You think it's about what they did or didn't do. But the truth is, it's about what you do to yourself. It's about how you treat yourself. And that's what I didn't get. I didn't understand that I had to love myself first. I had to stop looking for validation in other people, stop trying to prove my worth to anyone else. For so long, I thought that if I just tried harder, if I just worked a little more, made a little more money, looked a little more confident, then everything would fall into place. But the more I tried to control, the more I pushed people away. The more I tried to force myself into some ideal version of what I thought I should be, the further I got from who I really was. I kept thinking that if I could just change the surface, change the outside, then everything would fix itself. But that's not how it works. If you can't fix the inside, nothing on the outside is going to matter. That's the lesson I had to learn the hard way. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Emily had seen something in me I hadn't seen in myself. She saw potential. She saw someone worth loving. But I couldn't see it. I was too busy doubting everything, doubting her, doubting me, doubting us. I thought if I just held on tighter, if I just tried harder, I'd make everything work. But in reality, I was suffocating it. I was suffocating her, suffocating myself. Maybe if I had trusted her, trusted us, none of this would have happened. But instead, I tried to control everything, and in doing so, I lost the one person who truly cared. I knew that I couldn't just sit around and wait for things to magically get better. If I wanted to change things, I had to change myself. And that's the hardest part. Admitting that I had failed, admitting that I wasn't perfect, that I wasn't who I wanted to be. It's easy to hide behind the facade of I've got it all together, but the truth is, I didn't. Realizing that was a wake-up call. I started looking inward, started working on myself. I spent more time on my own, reflecting on who I was and who I wanted to be. I started to forgive myself for all the mistakes I'd made, all the times I'd let fear take control. And slowly, piece by piece, I started to rebuild myself. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I learned that love isn't about perfection. It's about being real. It's about showing up as who you are, flaws and all. And most importantly, it's about trusting that you're worthy of love, and trusting the people around you. I realized that Emily wasn't the problem. She was never the problem. I was. And the hardest thing to admit was that I had been the one who pushed her away. But admitting that was the first step toward healing. I couldn't change what happened, but I could change how I moved forward. Months passed. And it wasn't easy. I kept thinking about her, wondering if I'd ever get a second chance. I kept asking myself, what if I could just turn back time? But I knew I couldn't. What was done was done. I had to accept that. But in that acceptance, I also realized that I wasn't the same person I was when she left. I had changed. I had grown. Eventually, I ran into Emily again. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I expected. But there she was, standing in front of me, and I could feel everything shift. The old fear started to creep in, but this time, I didn't let it take over. This time, I was different. I had learned how to be vulnerable, how to trust myself, and how to trust her. We talked. Really talked. Not about the past, but about where we were now. I apologized, sincerely, from the heart, for everything I'd done. I told her how I had changed. I told her how I had learned to trust, to love myself, and to stop holding on so tightly. I didn't expect her to take me back. I didn't expect anything, really. But something in her eyes told me that she saw the change. She didn't say much, but she didn't need to. I could tell that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance. A chance for us to rebuild. A chance for us to see if we could make it work, together, without the doubts, without the insecurities. And maybe that's what love is. It's not about having it all figured out. It's about learning, growing, and trusting the process. It's about being real with each other and ourselves. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this: I'm not the same person I was when I lost her. And if we ever get another chance, It'll be because I'm ready to show up as the person I truly am, flaws, mistakes, and all.